The session explores how poetry continues to serve as a powerful medium for reflection, resistance, and reform, giving voice to contemporary realities and the collective conscience. May I invite our esteemed panelist Bijoy T, Dillip Kumar Das, Anjali Roongta, Dr. Mala Dasgupta, and moderator Sarbajit Chowdhury to kindly join us on stage. Please welcome them with a warm round of applause.
Welcome once again. Now it's already good afternoon. Last time I wished you a good morning. So myself being a poet myself, so it's this topic is very personal, engaging for me, and really looking forward to a very good conversation in this panel. Welcoming all of you. Thank you for coming today. So we will quickly move on to the first question that we have. Why does poetry often become a voice for protest during moments of social or political crisis? And what makes it resonate so deeply with people? You know, often we have figured out strong voices of protest in the poetry. So who would like to take the question? Sure,
Hello.
yes,
Hi, I'm Anjali Roongta. I'm a poet myself and I have around 8 poetry books at this point. So to answer your question as to why poetry becomes a tool to give voice to social unrest, I would like to say something that I heard Javed sir say at the Excite book meet, which is that poetry gives voice to the collective conscience of people. So whatever we are feeling, poetry will put that into words. That's the poet's job, quite literally. So, for example, during the Bengal famine, poems were the way people were communicating their distress. Or even now, when we have a silent mental health epidemic, we see so many poets writing about depression and anxiety because it is a very versatile tool. You can use metaphors, there's imagery, and you can take wildly disconnected things and connect them through poetry, and that makes people relate. So I guess that's why poetry is the form of social protest for a lot of people.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I think, like, poetry gives language to our empathy, to our feelings. Now, if we think of a scenario when some sort of political or social crisis is going on, we find a lot of unrest, chaos, and commotion in the streets. People are very scared, they are angry, but they cannot give voice to their emotion because they think too many things. They have lots of mixed feelings, but they don't have those words to express themselves. Now, during this time, if a person starts reciting a poem, say, for example, Kazi Nazrul Islam's poem, Bidrohi, the words, the fiery words of breaking the chain, inculcate or bring about the feeling of courage in them, and they can express themselves properly. So the few words, the powerful words of poetry give power enough to the people to, to be courageous and express their emotions properly.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Professor Dr. Dillip Kumar Das. I'm a different genre of author and poet. I'm basically a professor of psychiatry in Apollo hospitals at Raipur and Bilaspur. I have been in mental health department over last 31 years, but I've been trying to introduce poetry and short stories into my practice. And I have conducted more than 450 mental health awareness camps, and I have gone to the poorest of the people and telling them anecdotes, Kabir's Doha, and my own created short poetries, and they have been influenced so much that they never forget all these things, like poetries, which I have explained to them. And for that cause, I have almost published, apart from my technical books on counseling and stress management, I have published almost 8 books on poetries and short stories. Like poetries, I published short poetries, long poetries, haikus, and all of them I published from multinational publishers like Notion Press, Power Publishers, Patridge India. So, I mean, considering poetry, it's a very, very powerful emotional, healer, which can heal anxiety, stress, depression, unconscious conflicts, and it's very powerful to heal PTSD also, in which people struggle with catastrophes. So for me, poetry is an excellent media for the societal reforms. Thank you.
Yes, now, moving on to the next question, and I will start with Bijoy sir. Do you think, now we have talked about poetries which challenges, political interests or social interests. Now moving to the poetries which are personal, like the personal poems and the depiction about love, pain or identity that can create social change?
Thank you for that question, and thank you, Kyoto, for having us here. My name is Dr. T. Bijoy Thazhethil. I am a former journalist, former communication consultant for Reserve Bank of India and later Madhya Pradesh government. And my published book is called Click Snapshots in Verse. And I primarily bought my book on the stage because of this question. So it's not a wonder that it got tossed to me. The cover is designed by me, and it's my brother's. It's an album photograph of my brother, and it's the last photograph of him before he passed 26 years ago. Okay, and and the whole book is dedicated to his memory, and these are all images meant to trigger memories of the past. But like you said, to expand beyond the personal, right? Most times, any voice that comes out is a function of who that person is. So when Sylvia Plath writes, she's writing from her own situation of domestic abuse. Yes. When a lady from Bangladesh writes, because we were discussing Tasleema Nasreen, we were discussing all these people, they are writing from their context. So even if their story is personal, the poems also reflect the voices of many. I think that also is very important. When someone talks about love, and that love is forbidden in that country, okay, legally forbidden in that country, that is also a voice of protest. So I think, I just want to keep it very short, but there is always the person reflecting society, and if you're reflecting society, there is always voice for protest.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, indeed. Moving on to ma'am, with a very, when I talk about poetry, one of the very predominant woman voice that comes to my mind, and I dedicate my journey of writing poetry to her, Kamala Das. She is one of my very favorite poet. And what I wanted to ask about, as those who have read Kamala Das, we know that she has been trapped in a very unhappy marriage, right? And her poetry becomes a tool where she explores that unhappiness, and she questions the taboos that are being put on women, right? In her poem Stone Age, she openly questions the sexual infidelity in a very unhappy marriage. So I really want to know, what are your views on her?
So as a women writing, if you've read feminist literature, you will know that there's a history of women having to use the language of the patriarchy,
yes,
to break down patriarchy. So like a very random example would be The Mad Woman in the Attic, one of the first feminist literature books. Yes. So I think that is what happens here with a cultural context, because when we talk about feminism in the West versus feminism in the East, it's very different. So I feel when women are writing about desire, because that's one of the core themes in her works, it is a very important conversation to happen, because women's desire of any nature is not looked upon well by society. Whether it's emotional desire, physical desire, whether it's desire to even grow as a person, psychological desire, it is looked down upon because women have the supporting role in a patriarchal society. So I feel these poems, even if, like Sir said, the personal is always a reflection of the context. And like Sir was talking about mental health. So women's mental health and poetry will always have that connection because poetry is simultaneously personal and political.
I'll just add on to what Madam has said, and this is one of my poems I recently wrote. This is for all the girl children, even it's for all the children. I'll just recite the poem. If I loved my daughter, I loved all children, jumped the cascades and gone to my mother. I might have left all of you, my daughter, my mother, and all the children, but I know once I was there in my mother's womb, for then we all were children, now old, someday perish. Let us play the divine game, someday we all become children again. Thank you.
Another one of very famous Bengali poetess, Taslima Nasrin, from the other end of Bengal. When we talk about her poetry, we talk about her creations, we find a very strong personal conflict as well as contextualizing it in strong political and religious context. And those who have know her, she has to pay a lot of personal cost on of that, right? So how do poets decide that bar, where to stop and where to not create anything, any controversy which can cause personal problems or personal cost?
Okay, thank you. See, first of all, it needs a lot of courage, especially for the women in a patriarchal society, to voice against such things. Like, to talk about religious dogmas, then patriarchy, all these things, like to protest against all these things is really a courageous, it takes a lot of courage rather. Now, although she knew that if she talks about, things which she shouldn't, which the society actually wants to hide, okay, the society doesn't want it to be flashed out. The people in power wants to hide all these things. Like, she knew very well that if she writes these things, it will cost a lot for her. She will be, as we have seen what has already happened to her, she knew the outcome. Still, very courageously, she wrote about it, or rather she wrote against all these things in order to give voice to the voiceless. I think that was a really wonderful thing that she has done, even though her life was at risk, or still she's facing a lot of problems. But she chose to do it for the benefit of all.
Yes. On this context, I would like to mention one particular work of her, because of which she is banned that work is particularly banned in Bangladesh, that is Lajja. Even I personally, I have to do a lot of effort to get a copy of Lajja. And it's a read that I will recommend everybody, because that where I think her whole literary journey, is the core of her literary journey. Moving on to Dillip sir. Sir said, as Sir has specialized in mental health. One of the very predominant English author, Sylvia Plath, who has been known for her, mentally conscious poems and her deep history of abuse from her father. The question goes, Sylvia Plath is frequently read as a deeply personal poet. How can her work and also be seen as a response to social pressures, gender roles, and expectations placed on women?
See, whatever I have read about Sylvia Plath, she lived only for 30 or 32 years, but she has done a tremendous job as far as poetry is concerned, and all her poetries came into forefront after she passed away. And most of her poetries are on love and desire. And like T.S. Eliot said, poetry is blood into ink. So I think she has expressed her emotions through ink of her blood.
Hi. So my debut novel was actually on mental health and therapy, specifically women's mental health and therapy. And I think one of the chapters is even named after one of Plath's poems. Oh, wow. I'm a huge Plath fan, clearly. So, yeah. And another poet I would like to mention while we are having this conversation is Emily Dickinson, because you cannot talk about Plath without talking about Dickinson. So, when you're writing about mental health, and as someone who's been on the other side of the therapist table, the thing is, it is very difficult because you are writing about such a sensitive topic that you might actually cause harm. And that is a very important conversation I feel poetry solves, because there's so much metaphor, there is so much twists and turns in a poem that it'll reach you without hurting you.
Just adding 2 lines
Yes,
on
sure,
Sylvia
sir.
Plath, only because thanks to this session, I went back to my literature books and went back and read Sylvia Plath again.
Thank you, sir.
So Lady Lazarus, The Belger, Daddy, these are all also anti-fascist poems.
Yes.
So when we speak about the personal and what we reflect as a society, these are poems that reflected her deep turmoil with patriarchy, with all of these issues which were happening at her own house. Like you spoke about abuse was also from her partner, abandonment, abuse, kids being taken away, the mental health issues around it. So her death is tragic even more so because the person who benefited the most from publishing of her poems was her husband who also abused her. So in a weird way, Sylvia Plath will remain this legend because of the tragic person that she was. So, yeah.
And even her death is very tragic. You know, how a person, let's in this respect, a woman can be mentally disturbed or mentally tortured, I would say, that she puts her head in the oven, in an oven, right, to just get relieved of that pain.
So I would like to add one thing over here.
Yes, ma'am.
And her poems also do reflect the pressure that was put upon the women, especially the expectations. Yes. Women were expected to be perfect wife, perfect mother. They cannot, be very angry. They cannot be very ambitious. Now imagine a woman as intellectual as her and being churned in the midst of gender roles. So that's really very, it shows actually the then society or the pressures of women during that period of time.
And obviously, patriarchy has this strange habit of either putting the women on an altar and making her twice removed from reality, giving her the examples of Durga and Kali and worship her. And that is, I feel that is somewhere also, in the other way trying to exploit her. And on the other hand, also we have either they have to be that perfect or the other they have to be victimized. I think that's one thing that sickens me about patriarchy. Yes, ma'am?
I think I read the exact same thing on social media, and someone, I think it was a creator called Vibhuti, who coined it the Devi witch complex.
Yes. Even back in the time, women who refused to live within the boundaries were called witches, and they were burnt down. Right? Yes. Now moving on to the much more, non-literary context, one question that haunts me all the time in this world of reels, tweets, and everything. In a world driven by reels, tweets, and instant reactions, how can poetry still be relevant and provoke meaningful social reflection? I particularly want to target the area where poem is not writing poem for views and likes, rather than writing poem for a cause or maybe a personal reflection or to create a personal connection.
So I started out as an Instagram poet. Like, I've been writing since I was 9, but I sort of got my 5 minutes of fame because of Instagram. And now I don't like the platform. But
everyone does not.
Yes. No, but the thing is, when you're writing for likes and shares, what ends up happening, and my mother told me this a very long time ago. She said, don't become a commercial author, because if you do, you'll end up writing what people want to hear and not what you want to say. So that drove my writing. And I realized you'll get more likes and shares if you write what you want to say, because people are tired of hearing themselves. Everyone can take the phone, make a reel, and that's important. Everyone should. Every story, like I read it in school sometime, that gossip was actually good for human survival because we learned meaningful things. So I think that is what happens when you're writing on social media. Like Javed sir said in his session that I heard, that poetry is becoming smaller. अब हम 100 शब्दों में फूल का बयान नहीं करते हैं. But the one word that we use, we are so sure that it gets the message through.
So I appreciate the point that you're making, but I also think that you open up poetry to a much wider audience. Poetry has always been alienated. So what you said, the way you started, right? You will reach an audience that wouldn't pick up a book. Okay, poetry was always a performed medium. Like I come from a theater background. So theater was always a performed medium, never recorded. So you needed to take the effort to go to a theater to see a performance. Now you can see the performance, you can see a poem on social media. So in terms of, it's just another medium. There are people who will still read a book. Yes. Okay, there are still people who read a book even if there is a film on that. Yes. Okay, yes. So that's a separate conversation between mediums. But in terms of reels, in terms of stories, I think there are people who are able to slow down. If you look at even Instagram, like you just said, authentic poets have great visibility. People who have a voice of their own, people who have there's the manner in which they conduct themselves, there's a slowness in which they perform, and many of it is, open mics and people performing at spoken word spaces, and it's done extremely well. And I think the good ones will stand out just like any other medium, and it's social media. You have to go through all that the algorithm throws at you before you reach the stuff that you want to see. But I think just like she said, she may have seen the reel. If she didn't attend Javed Akhtar, I saw the reel of Javed Akhtar Saab reading on social media. Yes. And I think that also makes it accessible. Yeah. Yes. So, yeah.
Also, yes, if we talk about this, as you talked about open mic, I'm open mic artist as well. I also go to several open mics happening in city. But when I started open mics 2 years back, at certain point after a period of 6 months, I fell into the trap of doing poetries and pieces which people liked. Then I realized, no, I'm not being true to my art. I can be true to my art when I choose to do things which I like to do. And obviously then there were repercussions, but I obviously find it okay. Yes. Next, moving on. How does poetry help amplify voices that are often silenced, especially those of women, minorities, and marginalized and communities?
Okay, let's imagine something. Say a big gathering where some prominent speakers are on the stage in the front, and they're speaking and they're talking about their views, etc. And at the back, imagine the minorities, the women, the marginalized, they're sitting quietly. No one is ready to listen to them. Suddenly, one of them stands up and starts reciting a poem. So, what will happen? Immediately, all will turn their attention towards that particular person at the back. Not because of his power, but because of his words, the truth that he is speaking. Everyone will realize that the truth that this person is speaking is something we were trying to ignore. And in this way, poetry gives voice to, amplifies the voice or amplifies the ideas of the minorities, of the marginalized, of the, women who are, looked down upon.
So, sorry, this one might be a little long, but I did my bachelor's thesis on Archive of Our Own, And one of the things we saw was that it has become a space for minorities to come to because academia might not always let them in. And I think poetry does the same thing because it's like women's pulp fiction. When it started, right, it was like, oh, romance, bad. So women read it because this was like, oh, it's the intellectual nahi hai, tum log padh sakte ho. Even though that was patriarchal, what it did, it gave women a space to share their stories. That's why we have Jane Austen. That's why we have Jane Eyre, right? So I feel that is what poetry does. It is the medium that is so diverse that you can say the most scathing thing, a biggest political review, without actually the person who you're reviewing realizing they have been reviewed.
Very true, very true.
My standard answer to when people talk about poetry or art versus film is, I say people will want to ban a film. People rarely come to ban a book. I said because it takes an effort to read a book. It takes an effort to understand the book. The film shows you what you need to understand, right? I think in some sense, just to add to what what they've all said, but it also allows you to speak in your language. So when the black slaves are talking in their language, or Kamala Das is writing in what was called bad English by all the critics who read Kamala Das initially, yes. I very brown, yes. Okay? When she writes in that language, right, she is also catering to people who speak that language. I think when you speak for people and you are the representative in that sense, you become symbol, but you also are reflecting that part of society. I'm just going back to the original answer. But the marginalized need a space, and poetry is in that sense. If you go to different parts of this country, you will hear poetry has different cadences based on the kind of speech that you have, based on the kind of songs that you have, and each of those help those people tell their stories. And we're talking about very specific, I'm talking about language minorities, but there are also different kinds of minorities and marginalized people who have been able to bring about change through the medium of poetry because it is accessible to the people they want to communicate to also.
I'll just add on to all this discussion as far as my faculty is concerned. Recently, we had our 77th annual lesson conference of psychiatry in Yashabhumi, Dwarika, Delhi. I chaired a session for electroconvulsive therapy in elderly patients. Apart from all those scientific things, I talked to my past president, Professor Dr. Savita Malhotra from PGI Chandigarh. I talked to her to add some sort of literary activities into psychiatry, like adding some poetries, short stories, short poetries, long poetries, which is basically very, very soothing to the patients people come with so much of agony, depression, so much of emotional turmoil. I see every day, I see young girl, they are physically, mentally abused by their own relatives, and they just literally cry down when they come to me, and I become very empathetic towards them, but that doesn't mean that I show my own empathetic attitude towards the patient, because that will be counter transparency to the patient, and that will obstruct the treatment modality. So keeping counter transparency apart, I have to be empathetic to the patient by telling some stories, some motivational quotes, some quotes from Astabakr, Kabir, Amir Khusro, and Rumi, and I tell them my own created poetries and all. So it is always poetry is always very great essence to all the people who come with especially mental health problem. And any form of art, it might be prose and poetry and short stories, any music, dance, any form of art is for artist and society. It cannot have any other impact apart from the artist and the society. So we should keep up poetry and literature up to the head.
Thank you, sir. So it was a very engaging panel. Thank you everyone for sharing your views. Indeed, I think poetry is a way of life that we live every day. It's the medium that we live every day. Thank you everyone. Thank you for your valuable time.
Thank you to all our panelists. May I now invite all our panel members to kindly join us on stage for a felicitation. To do the honors, I request Mr. Sanjay Banerjee to please come forward. May I call upon our panelists Karthika Maheshwaram, Shalaka Kering, Arun Kumar Khanur, Rajiv Agarwal, Bijoy T, Dillip Kumar Dash, Anjali Roongta, Dr. Mala Dasgupta, along with our moderator Sarbajit Chowdhury. Please, may we have a huge round of applause for all our panelists.